Hey everybody, this is Jason Jeffries, the Alliance Project. We're going to do a video on the Dogon tribes, Sirius B and A, and a little bit, we'll kind of touch on Dolphins a little bit. Not to get too weird, but we'll throw it in there. So if you look, basically there's a tribe called the Dogon tribe that they live near Timbuktu, and they have information that by today's standards it's impossible for them to have. They knew the rotation of a star, the makeup of that star, the composition of it, and the rotational period of a star around that is actually invisible to the naked eye, and the exact orbital period to even down to the revolutions that they make together. Essentially, they kind of twist as they're rotating, and as time goes on, they can make a diagram of where they are at different points of time. You know, the linear model shows the transition of time, and where those dots are just shows their location in reference to each other. So let's go. So the Dogons have a cave on their land, essentially, that it stretches back into a mountain, and there's inside that cave there's depictions that are about a little over 700 years old. And the brightest star we see in our sky is called Sirius, and it's been known by many names, but a lot of us, there's actually speculation that that's where Osiris, the name Osiris, and the eye of Osiris and the symbolism behind that comes from that. Because essentially, even if you go to Google Sky, anything like that, if you zoom in on the infrared spectrum, maybe even the regular spectrum, you look at Sirius, they completely edit out something in the middle of it. It almost looks like there's an eyeball or something in the center of it. It's kind of creepy, but that's getting off point. But Sirius has been a part of culture for so long. It's actually the closest star in our sky, the brightest star in our sky, amongst many other things. So they have depictions of this star in the cave, and as I said, it's about 700 years old. We didn't discover this until the 1800s. They actually validated that in 1862, and about 30 years ago have they really been able to figure out its composition and what it's made out of, and essentially really find out what these Dogon knew 700 years ago. Now, they said it had roughly an orbital period. Sirius B had roughly an orbital period of 50 years, I think, 50. So, and they showed how, like I said, they showed. I'll get to a diagram here in 1 second. I'll reshare it here at the end of the video to show you guys what the diagrams I'm talking about and the translation of this information. But we've had people, scientists, scholars from all walks of life come and stay and live with these people to find out how they know this knowledge. But what they fail to see is when they're actually going to the point where they're accepting that these people had this information, then they have to, by default, accept where these people say they got the information. Or else it doesn't make sense and it's completely redundant. Why would they spend all this time, money, effort, research, only to say, yeah, they were right the whole time, only ahead of us, but not research the enigma or give any credibility to how they say it happened. So when a star is essentially comes to a certain stage, it can go one of two ways. It can go hypernova, supernova, and explode, or it can become a red giant, get sucked into a white dwarf, and then go down that stage. That's actually what Sirius A is, and it's a white dwarf. They're actually the smallest star type, and I believe they weigh around 1.2 tons per cubic inch, something like that. It's insane. It's actually, they knew that essentially it's closest to the heaviest matter, or the heaviest, densest matter in the universe. I mean, not directly, I guess, if you associate other things, but they were pretty much right on point with that. Just to add something, they also knew what Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were to look like if you were to approach them from space, which I find amazing, because they're spot on about Sirius A and B. They don't even have a written language. They speak. They carry on oral traditions, and they have kind of a hieroglyphic, pottery type way they hand off knowledge sometimes, or pass down trinkets, but essentially we couldn't measure this until 30 years ago accurately. And check and verify that they were correct, so it's just odd to think about. They also know about red and white blood cells and a lot about the human body. And like I said, all this from a supposed, almost aboriginal tribe, like where they're separated, supposedly separated from whatever was making us evolve over the years. And when you think about that, you can get back to Sitchin and a lot of the researchers when they're talking about human evolution and how it just doesn't make sense. Because how could you have these people, all right, if you have all these societies that seem to bloom up just on a natural process, even though it took us about 2 million years to get from the point where we don't have to go find a sharp, pointy rock out in the woods or out in the dirt. We found out it took us 2 million years to find out that we could sharpen that rock, chip it away, and make it the shape we wanted to instead of looking. So what wouldn't take us another 2 million years to master language, the arts, sewage, plumbing, schools, astronomy, the zodiacal houses, all the information that we have today came from these ancient societies and cultures. So if they were just doing it by chance and evolution, then why wouldn't it be 2,000 years from now, 2 million years from now? Who knows? But the idea is, okay, how would these Aboriginal people, all these people that are supposedly secluded from whatever high society, high technology was influencing the other people, how would they know? How would they have the same traits and knowledge and things that we just are now attaining now if they didn't all come from an original, basically the cultures were destroyed and, different things happened. It's an interesting thing to talk about. So as I said, a group of scientists and researchers went to the Dogons to find out how they acquired this knowledge. And as I said, that was probably a huge mistake in their idea, because once they accept they have this knowledge, they have to accept where they got this knowledge. Well, they said they went back and showed them the cave drawings where classic UFO comes, lands, these dolphin-like beings, these serpent dolphin-like beings that came out, essentially, went into where they came from, and taught them about that place. That's how the Dogons knew about Sirius, because that's the star system they came from. So one of the depictions on the wall actually showed a perfect orbital diagram throughout time between 1912 to 1980, or to 1990, excuse me, where they essentially were two really key points in human society and the raising of consciousness. Like 1912 was the first time we had essentially made communication with the Greys, or the Greys actually came up as 1990, supposedly, if you look at the information in the history, that's when certain consciousness grid was actually finished around the Earth. So that's a whole other topic for another discussion. We'll get back to that if you guys are interested. The one really eerie thing about it is that the same movement of that star is the exact movement of DNA. It's the exact spiral double helix of DNA. It's essentially a match, and it's a lot of information to take in. But when you understand how the stars interact with our DNA and ignite our DNA essentially, and evolve us, then you start to understand that. That's another topic for a later discussion as well. We'll call that Jedi physics. We'll go into that later. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how old people think the Sphinx is. This goes with ancient history and knowledge too. There's essentially a man named Ori Delubitz, I believe is how you pronounce it, discovered that he was an Egyptian archaeologist. He wrote lots of books, but he essentially found out that there was water erosion on the Sphinx that wasn't on the pyramids. It wasn't present anywhere else. And they kind of dated this water erosion, and they realized that there was two layers. So there was essentially water hasn't been there like that for 12,000 years. So we know that the water, to erode that, it has to be older than 12,000 years. We erode it in the condition it has, and the sand buried it up to its neck and eroded more away. So essentially we know that about, but pretty much not all, but at the point, at this time and still today, most of the Egyptian scholars are Muslim or study the Quran. The Quran says the planet's 6,000 years. The information on the Sphinx tells us it's 12,000 years old, at least. At least. So we know, essentially, they can't talk about it because it's just blasphemous. That already doubles the age that their Bible, their holy book, says Earth is created. So it's just and when you realize that probably 95% of Egyptologists and people that study these ancient artifacts are Muslim, and study the Quran, follow the Quran, then you understand that. That's why it's a taboo subject and not a real topic. So what's that tell us? That tells us the Egyptians didn't build this Sphinx. They found it and restored it, just like the Incas restored all the ancient monolithic stone structures of their time. You can see the Inca period building in patchwork. It's obvious, even to a person that has no clue what the hell they're looking for or talking about. They can look at this and know that this is a patch. This is built afterwards with inferior craftsmanship, carpenter skills as the first one. When you see the original one, we still can't match it to this day. There are stones there that are 1,500 tons of rose quartz. Okay, they said that we chiseled that with a bronze hammer and some stones. Okay, essentially, I work in construction. You need a diamond bit, probably titanium or some kind of alloy, but it has to have diamonds in the bit to cut that. Essentially, you cannot move it with a crane. You couldn't move it with a couple cranes. There is no way to move that. Not one block. Okay. They had ancient machining technology. Period. The people that came after had technology, but not near as advanced. Okay. It was degradation of the society. All right, the Sphinx is facing a very specific direction. I believe this gives, and this is based on the work of many New Age chematologists, I would call them, because obviously it used to be the ancient chem alchemy. That was what it derived from. The idea of it is there was no zodiacal house before the time of Leo. Time of Cancer was the first precession of the equinox. The time of Leo was the time when everything essentially wasn't tilted. There was no precession of the equinox. After that, there was a precession of the equinox. I believe this was very symbolic of the equinox. if you go into many of the diagrams inside these Egyptian tombs, you will see that there's the zodiacal house, so the whole zodiacal wheel. Everything points to Cancer. Cancer, in angles, many angles, everything points to Cancer. There was no zodiacal house or procession of equinox through a symbol until just after the sign of Leo. And this actually coincides perfectly with our new dating around 11,000 BC to date the Sphynx for its origins, or at least its origins for being weathered and built. I'm thinking that's a very conservative estimate. When you consider after the use of the internet and the Atlantis craze blew up because people got to look at Plato's writings and communicate Plato's writings and all these other writers in new light, and they started to see that this was historical documentation and not fictions or a work of fiction. As I said in earlier videos, we have a rotation that we go through the awakening and the falling asleep, going away and towards the galactic. Lines told us that was in 2012 that we started to go through our awakening stage. Now, a lot of you will be beginning to be awake. You'll take interest in your health, fellow man, your environment, what you can do to unplug and better yourself and others. You're always under your knowledge instead of maybe entertainment, and that's a good thing. You have to go with that change and adapt. But that's what all of this proceeds around, is the age of Aquarius, the age of enlightenment. This is the age where we all start to wake up again. And every time we go through this, we get a little bit more and more involved. So if our world did go through a fever or cleansing process with passing of the planet, I think ultimately it would just be just like a fever on a person. It would kind of cure you. You would be fighting off the disease, right? And if we had more people in touch with nature and their fellow man, then those people wouldn't perish. If you're prepared and in touch with nature, and you don't have too many roots in letting your possessions and your life rule over you, and you having rule over your life and your possessions, then you realize that they're nothing. You should let them go if your house is flooding. And by the way, the floods that I said about a month ago, I said there'd be crazy floods, but probably hardly any good pictures of a second sun or any good orbs for the last month. Yeah, we've had a 1,000-year flood, 500-year flood, 800-year flood, and another 1,000-year flood in all different parts of the world. I think that was something we need to look at, because people don't realize that they might not follow, or they might see these things later, not hear the videos, back to back to back to back, and essentially look. Might add, if not all my videos are in the video list, you have to go to the playlist list and go to the Awakening playlist. Those are all videos done by me on different projects, like the Leak Project, or possibly on John Moore's radio show. I know I was on there twice. I'm not sure if I uploaded those videos yet or took them to YouTube. But the idea is you give the owner, the original proprietor, the upload, and you share it as a playlist, because they're part of the work. They need to get credit, and that's just how this works. We're a community. We don't hoard it all for ourselves. Okay, so that's a heads up for my channel, not only my channel, but other people like me. So you have to check out the playlist. Don't just check out the videos. Also, I leave a lot of literature in there, in ebooks, and also tours, basically, of all these Inca and ancient monolithic period Egyptian chematology, all these different mysteries of the world that most people actually don't even know about. They do not broadcast or talk about. It's a hidden tour, if you will, and we'll get more into that later. But I'm actually I'm making it a life mission to travel to some of these places. And yeah, I'd really like to get inside the King's Chamber and do the whole the resonance chamber essentially, and do that whole thing where you can hum and you can hear it it echoes and amplifies like 2,000 times. So one little sounds like 10 million people chanting. It's healing energy. You can sit there in the tombs and the clocks. Like it would be a cool process. It would really be neat because you realize there's healing properties to all this, and they knew so much more. And I believe that that's what Dogon was talking about. Also, because there are 32 to 33 resonance chambers. These things are insane, perfectly resonant. Capped. 22 of them were capped. They just released and opened this to the public in 2012, December of 2012, by the way. And they let people go through there and discover this and see it and view it for yourself after all those years. And there's also a video that they're actually supposed to be releasing at the end of the century, supposedly, about what they found that they relates to the Sphynx. So I believe that's the Halls of Lamenty, and essentially humanity wasn't ready. The Guardians probably didn't find us ready, and I don't think it's a malicious intent by not releasing this. I think there might be a benevolent intent there. But nonetheless, we're getting out there. But if you just think back to the ancient Sumerians and the Egyptians, we were so advanced, we had such a higher understanding. And from that point on, we were going through the falling asleep stage, okay? So after that point, we went to falling asleep stage. And people got more disconnected with nature, they got dumber, they got more philosophical instead of knowing how it works. And that's why the beauty of science, religion, spirituality all blend together with the Sumerian and the Egyptian cultures. And as it got on, it was separated, divided, and the religious stories just started getting crazier and crazier because people didn't have the understanding that they did before. So they started talking about giant boats and this and that. We were talking about arcs and so on. So you gotta realize that it was just a falling asleep stage and people playing the phone game where you're passing on knowledge to the next person, word of mouth, and through understanding, false understanding of text. All right, so I'm going to try. I got a couple videos that I'm really trying to get out there and get the data to go smooth and flow together because I like to have it feel like a conversation with you guys so you understand. So the last quarantine video, I realized I actually fumbled up my words a few times. So what I was going to do before I left this video was give my brief understanding rundown of what happened. Okay, Anu, Enki, and Enlil, Marduk, they leave the cloning facilities. They run away from their home. They're rogues, essentially. Female-dominated planet, essentially, sort of the way I take it. And some scholars could argue with me, though. They do a false landing on Tiamat, land on Earth. Go to false base that even emits, fluctuations that make the people think they do. Then essentially what we know is Marduk destroys this planet Tiamat, the Annunaki. And we believe that he's kind of taking credit and renaming himself and actually naming himself a planet and things like that as well. So that we can't always use as solid evidence. But from my understanding is without naming names is the faction that these characters came from, landed on. The other people destroyed Tiamat, thinking that they were really on Earth because of the false land, or on Tiamat because of the false landing. Quarantined Earth, just in case they were wrong. Moved on. Okay, there's eventually when the people that were hidden under the water and surface. Thought that their pursuers were gone. They rose to the surface. They built essentially Atlantis. Other civilizations. Enki had a falling out after he created the human race. Sons of the serpent, the children of Elohim, Homo Atlantis, the perfect race, the perfect match between human and alien creator Annunaki DNA, which some could speculate has reptilian origins or not. Whether you want to look at it that way, that's another subject, because we look at the ancient text. Anu, the father, Darth Vader, essentially had two kids, which was Enlil and Enki. That Enlil had a different mother. Enki had a different mother. One had the dragon DNA, one had the bird DNA. That's essentially where the symbolism came from. And I believe it had to do with more of the ships and their aerial preferences, like helicopter, plane, and tank type vehicles, as opposed to just their antigrav spaceships that they use as submersible ships and as the helicopters, essentially, and things like that. So people kind of took both terms, and even the term Dogon came from that. It was essentially dragon, Dogon, dog stuff, dragon stuff. That's just really what it was. It was not Sirius satellite radio with the dog and the star in its eye. It should have been a dragon with the star in its eye. That's neither here nor there. It's just the word game. But I wanted to get and clear that up. Enki had a falling out and took Homo Atlantis, the perfect race, and said, "Hey, we're free, man. Let's go free and let's inherit that, or let's take over the world. Just essentially, let's inhabit it and just not live as slaves anymore." He felt bad for creating them, and when he created this with the monkey DNA, he's seen that compassion in a monkey. Just like if you were to watch a little baby monkey on TV, and he felt that compassion. He'd never seen that with the cold psychic race, the evolved people they were. And essentially, when he realized he did a crime against nature, he had a falling out and led man away from Garden of Eden, thrown out. That's why he appears as a snake in the Bible, trying to tempt Eve away. He was literally the man wasn't taking the knowledge because he had the left brain dominant male energy, and the female didn't. She was feeling that spiritual energy. She took the spiritual body. She left with the serpent. She ate the knowledge of good and evil. She ate the truth, essentially, is what that was. The knowledge of truth, the apple of truth. And they didn't want to be slaves or serve anymore. So when you got all these rich people and they don't have their slippers and their crops and their gold mines being dug and built, worked on, then they're upset, because that's the reason they created it. So they created some more people and essentially dumbed down the race even more and made them more controllable. But these sons of the serpent, children of Elohim, they pop up throughout history, all over. So I think it's funny how the snake represented knowledge, electricity, DNA, kundalini energy, your chakras, everything good until Christianity. The slavers wanted to oppress us. So when we woke up and didn't want to be slaves anymore, because they were putting a person between us and our Creator, then what's really the great deception? What's really the great deceit? Not Lucifer, not a made-up entity that they made up 400 or 500, 600 years ago. But Enki, essentially, where the story came from, was a good person, essentially had good intentions. Didn't mean there's nothing devil or like eating human souls, okay? These dark archons they had a battle with eventually later came on, what I would call them, and they possessed the bodies. That's what I believe is the essential, the real reptilian shapeshifters that people talk about, these dark archons. They inhabit, Marduk made a deal with them, Enlil, the whole thing. They made a deal with these beings. They needed vessels, so they had that choosing vessel. So even if you look at our wing, of the Milky Way galaxy, it's exploding. Boom! There's a hole blown out of it. That's what they're talking about. We blew off our own wing of the nebula in our universe, essentially, our galaxy that's rotating around that doesn't happen. We literally had a war here, Star Wars, to the point where it blew a chunk of our galaxy. You can see it clear as day. That's why a lot of people have this amnesia about where we were taught we were in the galaxy and this and that. When they finally get satellites out there far enough to take a picture of us, then we realize that, wow, this thing is destroyed. We're decimated. There is like nothing around us. We are like completely in quarantine and lucky to be here at all, essentially. But that's tonight's show. I'll try to get you a couple more uploads and a couple more subjects here. Every day I'm trying to get these things recorded. I've been busy this week, so yeah. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned.